So I think every company has to have a intentional way of working. And I'm talking about this is how physical space plays a part into the way our people interact. This is how technology plays a part in the way we interact. Ideally, you set those expectations ahead of people accepting the job, and they come to
Mm.
an environment that sort of like they're fully aware of and matches sort of what works for their energy.
Welcome to today's episode of Think Outside the Boss. If you are trying to figure out how to stay relevant, move faster, and lead through uncertainty, this conversation will give you a clear lens on what's coming and what to do about it. Nate Challen is a leader who's built his career at the front edge of change, helping companies adapt before the market forces them to. He started at Ancestry.com, working on one of the first social platforms before social media even existed. Since then, he's led transformation across major organizations like Johnson & Johnson and Sanofi, everything from digital marketing to global commercial strategy. Today, as the CEO of Brandistry, Nate helps companies navigate what's next. AI, social commerce, the hybrid workplace, you name it. And he does it all with a rapid shifting customer landscape. Nate, welcome to Think Outside the Boss.
Thanks, Katie. Glad to be here. Actually, I've been listening to your episodes, and you're doing a fantastic job.
Oh,
And
thank you.
uh, and as a marketer, also fantastic brand name.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you. I appreciate that. Nate and I go way back to UNC Business School. Well, Nate, when did you first realize that you were a leader?
So it's interesting. You've asked this question two different ways to your guests. You've asked it sometimes, when did you realize you were a boss? And you asked sometimes, when did you realize you were a leader? As I was listening to some of the episodes, I had two different reactions because I think the answer to when did I realize I was a boss was when I was the general manager in Canada and literally had to make a huge percentage of the decisions. And the team was looking at me and I had no immediate peer on the business. But I think if we talk about when did I realize I was a leader, it was actually probably at Kenan-Flagler. And it was in a weird context. As you probably remember, and actually I played a lot of basketball with your husband, Jensen, but we had a first year basketball team and it was all ex-college athletes. And we decided to play intramurals together and needed a captain that needed to be on the form. And so we had a vote for who should be captain. And I was captain of that team with two
Ah.
votes. So pretty much everybody on that team voted for themselves except for one other person, including myself. I voted for myself. But it's something I go back and reflect on because at least one other person said, hey, Nate can lead this. And it wasn't because I was the best basketball player, because I wasn't. And it did force me to really contemplate what leadership is, because leadership was getting that group of individuals, all of which thought they were the ones that should be leading, on the same page so that we could play effectively together. And that wasn't always doing all the stuff, right? In a lot of ways, it was doing the stuff nobody else wanted to do, the coordination of schedules and making sure people knew when the game was. And then also acknowledging people like our friend Chad Plotke, who played basketball in college, maybe should lead on things like game plays and those kind of things. What was cool about that is we played together for the full 2 years in different contexts. Played against Duke a few times. We won one of the intramural leagues while we were there. And I know we were older than most of our competition, but I also feel like UNC is a pretty high level of intramural basketball. So I felt like that was a big accomplishment.
So now you can say that you were on the UNC basketball team. Intramural in parentheses.
There you go. LinkedIn updated.
Yeah, I remember that because you were the one that was always sending out the emails of, hey, pickup game at 5 o'clock or pickup game tomorrow. I realize that.
Two
Yeah.
votes.
It's going to take a minute and laugh at that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. That's all it took. So you've had a number of global roles. You have worked in Canada, you worked in Germany, you worked in the
Mhm.
US. Is there another country in there? Or
Other
those?
countries, but I worked in 7 different states in the US.
Oh my
And
gosh. Okay.
sometimes it feels like different countries when you're going from Utah to Boston to Atlanta to Philadelphia to Chattanooga. And of course, we lived in North Carolina when we were together.
Yes. So you have taken a number of roles in different locations, which is really interesting. When you look back on that, how did you succeed in each of those roles? Like, will you land not only into a new role, a new team, but like a new city and a new vibe, new dynamics? What was kind of the formula that you went through or the steps you went through to get yourself acclimated and really start to like build that team trust and find your place on the team right away?
I think my secret to success that sits behind that, and then I'll talk about like how you actually arrive. I got married when I was 20. So my wife and I are coming up on 29 years in June. She is a complete part of my adult and career story, that partnership. So knowing that I've had a partner on each one of those moves has been essential. And it's a partner who's been just as excited most of the time about those moves as I have, but more importantly, a partner that's willing to have that conversation, get on the same page and say, hey, we're going to make this move. And so that's key. I know a number of your guests have talked about, aspects of their faith and church and that kind of stuff. I belong to a global Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The fortunate thing about that church structure is when you move somewhere, you're assigned the congregation. So it's a little different than some other churches work, but it means you have a church family immediately when you get there, even sometimes before you get there. I've been able to do that wherever I've been in the country or the world. And that is certainly comforting to have that support system immediately, which is very unique, I think, having talked to other people that make these moves. And it's been really important too with our children as we've moved, not just me and my wife, but 4 kids, the world a bit. I think what do you do to land? Some of it is some of the same things I love about marketing, which is just curiosity, trying to get familiar with the culture of the area, the things to do in the area, exploring and that kind of stuff. Being curious about the people you're working with and what makes them who they are, even if they're coming from a different culture. But frankly, culture is only part of it too, because like you have this overlay of culture, which creates some commonality, this overlay of personality, and trying to dig through some of those aspects. And actually, the one other thing I'd say that's helped a lot, I've almost always found some good peers. Maybe that was the toughest thing when I got to Canada, just because of the nature of the job. When you get to sort of be general manager, the peering dynamic is a little bit less. But especially for the previous moves in my career, finding people that were peers. And it's interesting, and especially in big organizations and even in business school, some places, the environment is such that peers are competitors. But my attitude, and I definitely think there's a Carolina Tar Heel element to this idea, is that peers are teammates. And even if you're chasing the same promotion or the same internship, I think if you lean in, you treat those people like teammates as opposed to competition, you get better out of that. And so that's been also another key, is finding that friend and peer to sort of share the challenges and also share the tips and successes when you're arriving somewhere new.
There are times we just hit a wall in leadership and we realize I've got to think differently about something. Tell us about a challenge when you felt like you just hit a wall in leadership and you're like, I've got to think differently. So what was the situation? And then what did you do to kind of level up and handle it?
I guess kind of mid-career for me, the story that comes to mind, and it's about people development. And I think, it's easy as a leader to sort of project yourself on other people. And also, there's a lot of companies and cultures where it's sort of up or out kind of thing, right? And especially when you're moving also from one organization culture to another organization, it's easy to carry the old organization culture to where you're going. Bottom line is, I had an ABM reporting to me, and, I could see the potential. I could also see that she was not stretching up into the potential. I naturally enjoy coaching people, and I was trying to coach and I was trying to be clear. And I'm also big on, it's really important that expectations are sort of set on both times. But I guess maybe that was one of the learnings I got out of this, because I just keep trying to coach on, here's what I think you need to do. And I'm not seeing reactions and responses and adjustments. And it became to me finally through a conversation we had that I finally asked a question, which is, what's your ambition? Because I just assumed her ambition was my ambition, right? Company someday. And it wasn't at all, right? Like what she was prioritizing herself wasn't necessarily measured in terms of promotions and leveling up. It was about quality of work, the sort of challenge at hand. And so the coaching I was providing that was all oriented towards how do you level up wasn't going anywhere. And the conversation we had was, I said, hey, I see this potential in you. So I think you should know that. But to realize that potential, it's also got to be your ambition. And that's okay if that's not your ambition. And I'm going to also acknowledge that. And we will focus our conversations on more of the job content and how you get better in what you're doing today and how you maximize sort of your satisfaction in the job you're doing today, and less in this is what you need to do if you want to go to the next level. And if at some point your ambition changes, which I've also, I think as we go through our careers and lives, things change. I'm going to put this on you to come back and say, hey, I'm ready to have that conversation, and then get back into that. So it made, I think, me less frustrated sharing the time. And it also, I understood why it was happening. And I'm sure it made her less frustrated also because we were spending a lot of time on things that just weren't that relevant for her at that time in their career.
What was your reaction when she said, this isn't my ambition? Like, I don't want to be president of the company. Were you surprised by it? Or are you like shocked? Like, what do you mean?
Well, it was definitely, I mean, I guess in some ways there's some surprise. And then actually it's more like aha surprise than I can't believe it. Cause, there's
Yeah.
a part of, I think each one of us, usually, I've gone through this experience with my kids too, where like something comes out that I wasn't planning for. And then as you sort of go, oh, well, it's not a complete surprise. But I hadn't really gone thinking about that. And so I think it was more that, oh, that answers a lot. I guess it was a positive sign of our relationship because there's definitely a vulnerability in somebody sort of acknowledging that, especially if they feel that the assumption is different on the other side, and especially in a professional situation. So I guess in hindsight, also, I felt that regardless of this frustration that had been building over this specific conversation, we had built enough rapport that we could have the more important conversation.
Yeah.
And I guess the last thing I'd say is, what I tried to do more in future conversations is align on that ambition up front, or at least, have that conversation so it was clear on both sides that stated what it is you're trying to accomplish beyond the job today. I've acknowledged, I've heard you. I've also given you feedback explicitly related to my view on how achievable that thing is or what has to happen in order to get there. And I think that's critical to helping people sort of advance in their careers.
That actually takes me back to a situation when I was in my corporate era. And I was in marketing at the time. And my manager pulled me into a corner, into a huddle, and he was like, all right, let's talk about your career and you're ready for promotion to brand manager, which, was like the big promotion or the first like big stripe that you get in your career. And I remember because it was the corner huddle and I was looking out at the floor, like the bullpens of the department. And I thought, I didn't say this to him immediately. I eventually did. But I said, you could double my salary and I don't want any of their jobs. Like that was what was going through my mind of I don't want to be the brand manager of Crest toothpaste. A lot of people would love it. I'm like, no, that's too bad. I don't want the CEO of my business. No way. And then, I took that insight. And again, I didn't share it with them right away. And I reflected on it and I realized that was when I switched my career back into sales. And I was like, marketing's great, love it. But when I thought about like the career, because my manager had that assumption, like, hey, you're here to be a brand manager. Yeah. And so I chose like a lateral move into sales and then, worked up from there. But yeah, there was a very like key moment too of, where it was assumed, because like, why wouldn't I want that? And when I really thought about it, it took that conversation for me to realize, no, I want something else. This doesn't excite me. And yeah, that's not good. That's not a good situation for an employee or for the leader or the manager to have someone who's in a role who's just not excited about it.
And it's great about yourself that you sort of to that acknowledgement sooner than later,
Mhm.
because I feel like so many people would have taken the job and
Yeah.
stayed in it, right? And sort of like let it out because it was what they were supposed to want or supposed to do.
Mhm.
And I think we spend so much of our life in our careers. So finding that thing that really energizes you, I think, is really important. My wife will comment, she's like, I just want you to be happy at work because you're not much fun when you're not happy at work.
So when we kicked off the episode, and you're right about, I do switch up the question of like, when did you first realize you were a boss versus when did you realize you were a leader? Share that story about when you first realized that you were a boss.
So I had been in sort of contributor roles and team leader roles, but always part of a direct peer team set, and always had a very clear boss of my own that was directly involved in many of the decisions. And when I got to Canada and was the GM, the dynamic in Canada and the US is Canada is about 10% of the population of the US. So Sanofi's design was Canada was a part of North America. North America was US and Canada, which meant I was at most 10% of my boss's scope. And frankly, I was 5% of my boss's scope because of where the business was at when I got there. And actually, as any good leader, you recognize priorities and you know where you probably should spend your time and attention, not on the 5% and probably on the 95%. So the good and the bad of it had tons of autonomy. The bad of it is you feel kind of alone. I actually had a great boss, learned a lot from her. I knew she was there when I needed her, but frankly, if I didn't need her, she wasn't coming calling. But you had to sort of adjust to like, okay, I guess I got to make the calls. And especially you've got a team working for you. It was the first time I had the full cross-functional team now reporting to me, not just marketers, but marketing and sales and ops and finance. And some of these people had other solid line bosses, but I was very much the day-to-day guy that was helping them make decisions and steering the ship. So that's definitely when I felt like the boss because of
Mm.
decision making. And I think
Yeah,
also then how the whole organization looked at me.
it's a different feel, different look. Like you're not one of us anymore.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's interesting with the boss. I mean, these are little things, right? So I talked about those friends and peers. Have to sort of find the right balance when you're the boss because you want to get along with people on your team. Sometimes you create a really close relationship with someone that works for you. So you can develop close relationships, but there also is a dynamic like I'm your manager. It's not appropriate for this to be 100% sort of peering relationship. You're not looking for that out of me and I can't expect that out of you. Lunch is the odd one, right? So it's like when you've got peers, it's easy to find people to go out to lunch. When you're the boss, asking people to go to lunch brings a different significance. My office in Canada, we had a break room and I would try to sit down and have lunch with people on the team, and that brings a certain type of culture. Interestingly, in Chattanooga, where we had a big factory, there was a cafeteria. And frankly, the bosses were not really that welcome because the team who was there was trying to get a break, right? And like, so they didn't want in that environment feeling like the pressure of these sort of alien bosses coming into the factory
Yeah.
cafeteria. So
Now I have
anyhow,
to be on, the boss is in the
yeah, yeah,
room.
yeah.
And
Yep,
oh,
yeah,
totally. Yeah. There's so many questions I want to ask from this point. So I'm sure you were
yeah.
in a situation, I don't know if it's this scenario or not, but a big question that I get is what happens when I'm promoted and I'm like from my peer group and I go from being
Mm,
peer to manager. So like from peer to boss.
yeah.
What have you been through that specific dynamic on it, like with the same team?
I mean, well, so one thing I'll just say on relationships, right, is they're always two-way. So
Mhm.
you control what you can control, which is yourself. That doesn't mean you don't have empathy for the other individual. It just also means like you can't control how they choose to sort of react to that circumstance. So if you're fortunate, you have an amazing person is excited for you. And maybe actually, if you've done a great job, they have high respect for you. And even while you're working as peers, they had this sort of like idea in the back of their mind that like, I could be working from them. I think people will tell people as they're coming up in their careers, it's usually people who are like one or two levels above you. And they'll say like, when I'm reporting to you someday. And I've heard that a few times. I don't believe any of them actually ever meant it. Not didn't mean it because they didn't think I had the capability to sort of like advance to a level maybe past the level they were at today. but I don't think any of them were sort of truly embracing the idea of, oh, when I'm still in the same position and Nate's my boss, that, I'm looking forward to that day. There's that two-way piece. So you have to try to be respectful and sort of be empathetic, but you also have to do your managing thing. And, it's funny, we used a few different words: boss, manager, leader. I think these things are related, but they're all different, right? And so this is a time where you have management duties, but there's different styles to manage people, but it really calls on your leadership duties too. I'll say on the flip side, where it can be really tough, right? If the other person has such a hang up over it, or maybe there's a reason that, like, this was almost the reverse situation, right? Than what you're talking about. You've been promoted over your peer, where it's like they've been demoted below you. So there can, in those cases, also be a performance dynamic that you're now getting to deal with. Sometimes it's just structural. It's like companies decided we're just going to organize ourselves differently. Don't have to worry that as much in a small shop, but like, as we know, in big corporations, that's all the time. And so, but if it is performance related, and maybe you're discovering also that somebody that used to be your friend, you're seeing them in a different light now that you're responsible for their development, for their performance, and those kind of things. Sort of be, I guess, caring enough to them to also be truthful as you're sort of leading and managing it, and not allow that previous friendship to sort of avoid the way of having tough conversations. It's harder in that scenario.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you about is the hybrid work environment right now, the hybrid office. There doesn't seem to be a good solution. Like, we went all remote, and now there's the call back to the office. Some companies have always been are remote and it works. Some are like, we have to be in person for a collaboration. What has been your experience with that as a leader?
Yeah, it's interesting. I got like sort of a head start on what everyone else experienced. So when I was in global, I had a very decentralized team just by geographic necessity. So I was based in Frankfurt, but we had dual global headquarters in our consumer healthcare division between Frankfurt and Paris because of a merger of a company, two companies where they had headquarters in those areas. And actually, because of employment law in the countries, they retained those dual headquarters. So I, right from the first day, had people based in both France and Germany, and I was American. So you've got culture and distance. Then over the course, as my team expanded, I had people in the UK, in the US, in South America, in Singapore, and it was not practical to bring all those people physically together on a regular basis. So we had started to figure out, how do we build in an environment where people can't, because of cost and time investment, be physically together all the time. And we did some interesting things. A lot of these were ideas that came from the team. We virtual coffees, and this was like a system that would randomly assign two people from the team to have coffee.
Oh,
Which
yeah.
didn't mean they had to drink coffee, but they certainly could. But it was like 20 minutes to assign one of the two people to create the calendar invite. It was over Zoom. There was no agenda. It tried to replace what would normally happen in the office, this random collision in the cafe or at the water cooler. So we discovered you had to be a bit intentional to recreate some of the stuff that you count on happening naturally when everybody's in the office together. And then my team had responsibility for training. So we were figuring out how to use Zoom, make training that we used to do in person able to be done remotely. And actually what was cool is we went beyond just how do you replicate exactly what you do in person, because there's actually things we could do when it was remote and had the technology that you couldn't do necessarily in person. You could very quickly break people out into groups because Zoom has a feature where you can do breakout rooms.
Yes.
And you can have different people holding pens at the same time, right? Which you can't do as easily when it's a real marker and a real board, but you can when everybody's sort of drawing on their paper. And you can embed technology into the workshop in a way that's more seamless. You also can break up training that used to happen in one day over weeks and let the learning sort of sink in. We started to apply some of what we were doing in training, and we would have, team building activities on Zoom. And we shipped chocolate to everyone's house around the world. But we did like chocolate tasting together as a team around the world on Zoom. So we're each having a very physical experience. But again, you had to sort of think beyond how you used to do things and sort of be more intentional about it. Now, what was interesting is then I moved to Canada and it's COVID, and I moved in the middle of COVID. So summer of 21. And so what, we're a year, 15 months out from the start of the pandemic. And that team, and actually I started the job while I was still in Germany. And frankly, it was no different other than the time shifting than my predecessor, who was leading that team 3 months before out of his house. When COVID happened and in Montreal, office shut down, they were not legally allowed to go to the office for 18 months. And the stuff they used to do around team building stopped. Now, they had all sorts of other things to figure out. So part of it was deprioritization, and part of it was like they didn't have the tools. I come from running sort of this fragmented team. And even though my whole team in Canada is based geographically, probably within 30 kilometers, as we talked about up there, of each other, let's just call it 16 miles for the Americans on the podcast. But even though they're sort of in geographic proximity, like I was able to take those tools and sort of apply them into this environment. And then as we went to hybrid and started to bring people back to the office, we could use a mix. Now, I think I'm very passionate about this topic because I think so many companies are sort of going through this and there's different mindsets. So I think every company has to have a intentional way of working. And I'm talking about, this is how physical space plays a part into the way our people interact. This is how technology plays a part in the way we interact. Ideally, you set those expectations ahead of people accepting the job, and they come to an environment that sort of like they're fully aware of and matches sort of what works for their energy. And I have seen very successful teams work 100% remotely and very successful teams who are in the office every day of the week. You can do it either way, but the approach is very different. Yes, companies were pushed out of the office because of COVID, came back at different times. Then there was this interesting dynamic during COVID where, in the first, let's say 6 months in, there seemed to be a talent rush where companies were scaling up for all these new opportunities. And frankly, so they hired a bunch of employees that weren't necessarily close to the office. Then two things pivoted: offices reopened, but also the talent dynamic pivoted also, right? Where it became a thing where people are eliminating jobs. And also now you've got this group of people that have been hired remote. That was the expectation set. Now they're not close to the office. They're being asked to come back in. And actually on top of that, you've got, I'll just call it old school thinking. I don't think that's fair. I see it tend to be with a generation that's what our parents talked about when they walked to school,
Uphill
snow
both
and
ways in the
yeah.
blizzard.
I do think there's something to be said, like there is value of people being in the office together. Like, so there is value there. So I think it's unfair to say that's just old school thinking. I think that is building culture and teamwork. But you brought up hybrid. Hybrid's the better example of this. We want everybody in the office 50% of the time. Okay.
Yes. Yep.
So the finance team goes, oh, we only need office space for 50% of the team because the team's only going to be there 50% of the time. So the office gets smaller.
Cost savings.
And then, yeah, cost savings. So they love that. Well, all right. So everybody shows up in the office on Tuesday because nobody wants to come in on Monday. And there's not enough seats for everybody. And on top of that, their day is a whole bunch of Zoom meetings because that's now become a norm. And you're like, why did I commute to
Right.
come into this office where there's not a seat for me and I'm supposed to spend the whole day on Zoom? And now you go like, why is it they need me to be in the office 50% of the time? Because the company hasn't taken the step further to say, this is really why we want you to be in the office. And we're going to design the way we work around taking advantage of the office. And we're going to design the space around collaboration, because that's, we're going to be here for collaboration days. We're going to have enough space for the people that benefit from working together closely to be there on the same days.
I'm big on culture. I'm big on relationship. And I think what you're saying is you have to be intentional about what are we trying to drive? What culture are we trying to drive? And ultimately, at a business, the business comes first. And so if there are people that don't want to come back to an office, then you don't want to come back. But hey, this is the line that we're drawing of like, these are the rules around it, these are the expectations around it, and it's not arbitrary. It's like this is how we're going to achieve more. So for me, the spin on like the remote or in office or the hybrid, it's all about like what culture are you trying to build? And yeah, anytime you put cost savings first, that's a part of the equation. There was a lot of leaders too that also didn't want to like they were too nice. They didn't wanna create conflict with their employees about coming back to the office. So they were creating, like, just different expectations for different people, and when there's that inconsistency, like, you're just planting seeds for bitterness to grow. Yeah, it's just without a plan in place, like, it's just another place for conflict to occur that's unnecessary, really. Like, when the leaders and when the teams aren't clear about what the rules are for it, not that I'm a big rule follower, but there's a time and a place for it, you
Yeah.
know? And it's just like, man, we don't have assigned seats, but I always take that desk. Nate's sitting in my desk today. Doesn't Nate know that that's my spot? It's like creating as
Yeah.
someone who like works with teams through conflict. It's like, man, let's have conflict about the ideas and like the strategy and the products, and let's have conflict around all the stuff that's going to move the business forward.
Mm,
Let's try to minimize the conflict between employees and
yeah.
minimize the conflict between people and have it around ideas, not about
Hmm.
where my desk is. I think this is a good place to lead into the lightning round.
All right.
All right, so the lightning round, same 5 questions I ask every guest on the episode. First one is, what is your favorite personality assessment?
I've taken a bunch of these, and I think there's value from each one of them. So I've done Myers-Briggs, I've done Strength Finder, I've done Insights Discovery. Insights Discovery we used a lot at both J and Sanofi. Working Genius, after you sort of put me onto that one. My go-to is Myers-Briggs, sort of MBTI. I'm an INTP. I think I first took it in a sales class at Kenan-Flagler. I like that because it's broken into these 16 personalities, but each one is very clear about what the components are. It's sort of like once you understand what the letters mean, it's easy to sort of understand who people are. Whereas I think some of the other ones that give it a name and the name in itself isn't as meaningful are a little tougher to sort of engage with. And they also sometimes mask the fact that we're complex, right? And even though most of them are built on multiple different axes, it's not always obvious in the name you get assigned. And so the other nice thing about Myers-Briggs, it's been around so long that people have like take your favorite character and apply it to the profile. So I'm a Yoda when it comes to Star Wars, but I've seen Harry Potter ones and I've seen like famous, and that could be a fun way to explore it with the team also. So it's my go-to, especially when I'm working with a new team, because it's easy to take, like I said, easy to identify. I think if you work with the team over a longer period of time, you can sort of layer in some of these other ones too. And I think for ourselves, Enneagram's one I haven't taken, but your guests have talking about it so much that it's on my list of things to do.
Yeah, Enneagram's a good one. Do you remember your working genius? Do you remember your two geniuses?
My geniuses, I looked these up before because like I said, I've been listening to all your podcasts, so I knew the questions were coming. My working genius was discernment and galvanizing.
Okay.
I think more interesting to me was my working frustration was invention and tenacity. And as someone who has multiple times had innovation roles and thinks of themselves as an innovator at the front end of things, frustration being invention was like really eye-opening to me. But as I dug into it, I think it is also the reason I like making things better. And I think the
Mhm.
part of the innovation process I really lead at is discernment. So making that choice. So it reminded me, I need to pair with those people that are more inherently have a different type of creativity.
Mhm.
And then that can be like a power pairing, which is the point of working genius, right? And
Yeah,
tenacity is also one of those ones which, it's interesting when you're the boss because you think that's the job, right? Driving people to the goal. Actually,
that's
I've,
galvanizing, not tenacity.
well, I guess seeing it through though is tenacity, right? Yeah.
Completing the task,
Completing the task, which if you don't complete the task, like, what are you selling?
right? Like if you don't
Um,
execute, you can have H.G.
yeah.
Lafley always said the only strategy the customer sees is execution.
Yes. So actually, what I've found with myself is that I seek out partners who help me complete the task. So I'm working on a
Mhm.
book right now, keep
Yeah.
me on track. I've got the idea,
Yeah.
but I want someone not just to work and bounce ideas off of, but someone who will help give me the accountability to make sure it sort of stays on track in terms of timing.
I just asked out of personal curiosity. I was
Yeah,
picking up
yeah.
discernment. I'm like, for sure,
Okay.
discernment is a beast of yours. I could tell. And the invention is the one who comes up with the ideas. So you can still
Right.
like working in innovation, but it does, the invention is coming up with the ideas. I think you
Hmm.
just like being in that space, and then you like to discern new ideas and creative ideas. All right. Second question is, what is a book that was instrumental in your life?
All right. So, I mean, the true answer to this question is probably the Book of Mormon for me, which we pair with the Bible and study as scripture. I converted, changed religions my freshman year in college, and I mentioned it's sort of a part of my story. And that said, it's not like the book I recommend to people the most often. And I actually had like 10 on my list. I'm not going to go through all 10. So this is my answer to your question. 4,000 Weeks, which was a book by Oliver Berkman. And he's basically positions himself as a reformed efficiency specialist or time management specialist. The concept of 4,000 weeks is that's the length of our life, 4,000 weeks. And his point is that many time management concepts are about how to make yourself more efficient, how to do more in less time. And his point is there is not enough time in your life to do everything you can think about wanting to do. So once you accept that idea, it is about choosing what is the best thing to do with my time. And so to me, that really changed and reinforced for me. I can spend a lot of time trying to be more efficient, but I actually really need to spend my time being thoughtful about what are the choices making about where I invest the time that I have. And he tells it in a great way where he tells the whole history of time also. So for certain like nerds that like history stuff, there's some of that too.
What is some of the best advice you've ever received?
I think two related things. So my boss in my global job, she said at one point I had a hiring decision and I had a candidate and I was looking at this candidate and I'm like, she'd actually done my job before. And I told my boss, I said, I think this person's fantastic, but they're frankly more like they'd be a better candidate for my job. And she said, if that's what you're worried about, then you are in the wrong job. And it gave me the confidence to go ahead and make the hire, which then further gave me the confidence to realize I can bring somebody in who maybe done more in their career and still find ways to unlock them and they can respect me. And it really boosted my confidence on a lot of level. Related to that, when I got to Canada, my boss, you know, as a leader, I think there's a lot of people that say leadership is this one thing and it tends towards extroverts. And I told you with my Myers-Briggs, I'm an introvert. And there's this idea of, and maybe it relates to galvanizing, this sort of like go out there and get them kind of rah rah. Yeah. And then a certain profile about communication. I'm noticing I'm doing this in the camera. Like when I look up, I'm thinking, and that's what I'm doing. It's not that I'm distracted. It's not that I'm like disconnected. But if people in the room don't know that's why I'm doing that, then they can misread that. So I had a lot of people sort of coaching me to say you need to be something different for a while. And this boss finally just said, hey, like what you're doing is working for you. You're authentic. People want to follow you. Like lean into who you are instead of trying to be something else. And that really stuck with me from that point on. So the one that comes to mind the most often is Rolaids. So we acquired the Rolaids trademark when I was at Sanofi. Johnson and Johnson. It had been off the market for 2 full years, and it took us another 9 months to bring it back to market. We literally just bought the trademark. I got put on this project, and huge vote of confidence. They had made this big purchase, and we did so many things wrong. And it's like the fundamental, like I had this opportunity to take this fantastic equity that was already known by 95% of heartburn sufferers. And actually, P&G owns it now. They bought it from Chatham while I was there, Sanofi while I was there. Fantastic equity, huge amount of backing and focus from the organization. Got to do some super cool stuff. Worked with Guy Fieri on the launch and worked with the WWE at one point. Actually, the first biggest failure we made was we got so excited about the opportunity. We did some market research that we only looked at like the high side and not the sort of like probability. And we started selling in the high side to our retailers. And we totally unanticipated how strong the competition was going to be. And I think we also missed the mark on what we were buying. We thought we bought a trademark, but we bought a brand. And there were key elements of the brand that we decided to change without really understanding how those elements connected to people. And we reformulated in part because we had to, but we didn't take the time to really make sure it matched, what those heritage consumers expected. So we had a big launch and got in a lot of doors, and then immediately missed expectations on sell-through in the retailers. And of course they don't like that, right? So then you're on your back foot the whole time. So you go from this like fantastic launch, and we did it super fast, which was great. It was a win, but then we're on our back foot. Now, not only did I learn a whole bunch of stuff about what to do and what not to do with like branding and launch, but I learned how to then turn around this business, and also changed our mindset from being, to really being a challenger and recognizing, there are other behemoths in this category. And even though we've got a great brand equity, we need to re-earn our place there, and we need to act like a challenger. So learn some stuff there. The one other thing that's really cool about that story is, despite all the financial goals.
It's so funny, like when you look back on it, because I know the
Yeah.
pressure of CPG
Yeah.
and like the
Yeah, yeah.
retailers. So despite missing all of the financial goals,
We beat the actual sales target in the finance document, right? That like supported the acquisition for
yeah,
year one. But then because of the sort of fallback, we struggled, right? I don't think we ever made the overall goal. Totally missed on the expectations we had changed to sell both to our customers and ourselves after that.
Mhm.
I still got promoted a year later. Actually, the company recognized, and the people that were leading that team at that time, frankly, they made a big investment in me in learning. They also took accountability and ownership for the choices we made together. No brand manager or senior brand manager makes all the decisions on a big acquisition themselves.
No.
And frankly, a lot of those conversations went all the way up to the president at that time. So they
Yeah.
acknowledge, I've seen so many examples, right, where they all the blame down, to the individual that was sort of running the project, even when they're part of the decision. So that was a great
Yeah.
leadership lesson, I think, also in terms of how you treat people and provide
Mhm.
logical safety for people, and recognize that
Yeah.
actually ambition is a really good thing.
Yeah.
And part of having ambition is you're going to miss sometimes.
Yeah. Fail fast.
Yeah.
Fail forward. Fail quickly.
Do you know
Cool.
the fail is the first attempt in learning?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
I like that one.
I love it. Final question.
Yeah.
So if you are playing sports and you are being called out onto the court for the UNC basketball team, intramurals, what is your hype song?
You're supposed to whisper intramurals. I took this back actually to the freshman basketball team at Algonquin Regional High School in Massachusetts. I was the captain and got to then choose the mixtape we used for coming out. And we had the boombox with the tape cassette, and we brought it out on the court and we played it. And the first song was Smells Like Teen Spirit.
Yes. Great
Yeah.
drums in that song.
And it's
Yes.
such a great, energizing entry point. And then I
Mhm.
thought about it. I told my wife this, and she was not super impressed with the pick. Appropriate, and I think it's still appropriate for leadership. I mean, not only is it just good music, but there's something about what the role is. And some people are looking around and saying, "Hey, are you here to entertain us?" And no, that's not
Instagram.
the
That's
job.
all
Yeah.
Instagram
Yeah.
is. Entertain me.
Nirvana Smells Like
Cool.
Teen Spirit.
I love it. Nate, thank you so much for being on Think Outside the Boss. Before you go, tell everyone where they can find you.
Yeah, the best place is LinkedIn. So I'm on there. So it's just, I think, Nate Challen. Follow me. I've got a newsletter on there called Brandistry Buzz. I just launched the newsletter on Substack, so you can also come there if that's your preferred platform. But those are probably the two best places to find me.
Cool. We'll link to all that in the show notes.
Right.
All right. Thank you
Thanks
so
so
much. Thanks for listening. If you liked something from this episode, hit share and send it to a friend or fellow leader. Don't forget to follow the show and leave a review, because it helps leaders like you find us faster. This episode of Think Outside the Boss was produced by Volt Productions. I'll see you next week, and until then, keep moving forward.